Okay, boys and girls, I have Where the Red Fern Grows by Wilson Rawls. I know your first reading activity is to read a story or a chapter from a chapter book. Where and when does it take place? Who are the main characters? So I'm going to read just the first two chapters. This is one of my favorite books, and I read it every year to my classes, and I was sad that I wasn't going to be able to read it to you guys. So if you have the book, follow along as I read. If not, listen, and I'm going to get a book to you, okay? So chapter 1 starts out, it says, "When I left my office that beautiful spring day, I had no idea what was in store for me. To begin with, everything was too perfect for anything unusual to happen. It was one of those days when a man feels good, feels like speaking to his neighbor, is glad to live in a country like ours, and proud of his government. You know what I mean, one of those rare days when everything is right and nothing is wrong. Those days are not easy to find. I was walking along whistling when I heard the dog fight. At first, I paid no attention to it. After all, it wasn't anything to get excited about, just another dog fight in a residential section. Now, what does residential mean? So we'll talk about that. Some of you might be thinking what that means, residential. As the sound of the fight grew nearer, I could tell there were quite a few dogs mixed up in it. They boiled out of an alley, turned and headed straight toward me. Not wanting to get bitten or run over, I moved over to the edge of the sidewalk. I could see that all the dogs were fighting one. About 25 feet from me, they caught him and down he went. I felt sorry for the unfortunate one. I knew if something wasn't done quickly, the sanitation department would have to pick up a dead dog. Okay, what do you think the sanitation department is? If they're picking up a dead dog, that's kind of like your trash men and things like that, okay? I was trying to make up my mind to help when I got a surprise. Up out of the snarling, growling, slashing mass reared an old red-bone hound. For a second, I saw him. I caught my breath. I couldn't believe what I had seen. Now, it makes me feel sorry for that dog that he's being ganged up on. I mean, those other dogs are fighting him. Twisting and slashing, he fought his way through the pack and backed up under the low branches of a hedge. Growling and snarling, they formed a half-moon circle around him. A big bird dog, bolder than the others, started in. The hedge shook as he tangled with the hound. He came up as fast as he fell over backwards. I saw that his right ear was split wide open. Oh. It was too much for him, and he took off down the street, squalling like a scalded cat. A big, ugly cur tried his luck. He didn't get off so easy. He came out with his left shoulder laid open to the bone. He sat down on his rear and let the world know that he had been hurt. So this dog is fighting off each of these other dogs. He is tough. By this time, my fighting blood was boiling. It was hard for a man to stand and watch an old hound fight against such odds, especially if the man has memories in his heart like I had in mine. I had seen the time when an old hound like that had given his life so I might live. Taking off my coat, I waded in. My yelling and scolding didn't have much effort, but the swinging coat did. The dogs scattered and left. So he takes off his coat and he starts swinging it around to try to get the dogs from still beating up on that dog. You know, you wonder, why didn't he go in with his hands and try to stop the dogs? Well, he would have gotten hurt. So usually you grab something else to fight off dogs. Down on my knees, I peered back under the hedge. The hound was still mad. He growled at me and showed his teeth. I knew it wasn't his nature to fight a man. In a soft voice, I started talking to him. "Come on, boy," I said. "It's all right. I'm your friend. Come on now." The fighting fire slowly left his eyes. He bowed his head, and his long red tail started thumping the ground. I kept coaxing. On his stomach, an inch at a time, he came to me and laid his head in my hand. So he knows that this man has been protecting him. I almost cried at what I saw. His coat was dirty and mud-caked. His skin was stretched tight over his bony frame. The knotty joints of his hips and shoulders stood out a good 3 inches from his body. I could tell he was starved. Now, I don't know if you all have seen a starving animal of any kind, but it's so sad because their bones kind of stick up into their skin. I couldn't figure it out. He didn't belong in town. He was far out of place with boxers, poodles, bird dogs, and other breeds of town dogs. He belonged in the country. He was a hunting hound. I raised one of his paws. There I read the story. The pads were worn down slick as the rind on an apple. I knew he had come a long way, and no doubt a long way to go. Around his neck was a crude collar. On closer inspection, I saw it had been made from a piece of check-lined leather. 2 holes had punched in each end, and the ends were laced together with baling wire. As I turned the collar with my finger, I saw something else. There, scratched deep in the tough leather, was the name Buddy. I guessed that the crude, scribbly letters had probably been written by a little boy. It was strange indeed how memories can lie dormant in a man's mind for so many years, yet those memories can be awakened and brought forth fresh and new, just by something you've seen or something you've heard or the sight of an old familiar face. What I saw in the warm gray eyes of the friendly old hound brought back wonderful memories. To show my gratitude, I took hold of his collar and said, "Come on, boy, let's go home and get something to eat." He seemed to understand that he had found a friend. He came willingly. I gave him a bath and rubbed all the soreness from his muscles. He drank quarts of warm milk and ate all the meat I had in the house. I hurried down to the store and bought more. He ate until he was satisfied. He slept that night, all that night, and most of the next day. Late in the afternoon, he grew restless. I told him I understood, and as soon as it was dark, he could be on his way. I figured he had a much better chance if he left town at night. That evening, a little after sundown, I opened the back gate. He walked out, stopped, turned around, and looked at me. He thanked me for wagging his tail. With tears in my eyes, I said, "You're more than welcome, old fellow. In fact, you could have stayed here as long as you wanted to." He whined and licked my hand. I was wondering which way he would go. With one final whimper, he turned and headed east. I couldn't help smiling as I watched him trot down the alley. I noticed the way his hind quarters shifted over the right, never in line with the front, yet always in perfect rhythm. His long ears flopped up and down, keeping time with the jogging motion of his body. Yes, there they all were, the unmistakable marks of a hunting hound. Where the alley emptied into the street, he stopped and looked back. I waved my hand. As I watched him disappear in the twilight shadows, I whispered these words, Goodbye, old fellow. Good luck and good hunting." Now, I always wonder when I read this why he didn't take the dog home and take care of him, why he lets him go on. I didn't have to let him go. I could have kept him in my backyard, but to pin up a dog like that is a sin. It would have broken his heart. The will to live would have slowly left his body. So he explains that, he doesn't think the dog would be happy to be in his backyard. So he was thinking about the happiness of the dog. I had no idea where he had come from or where he was going. Perhaps it wasn't too far, or maybe it was a long, long way. I tried to make myself believe that his home was in the Ozark Mountains, somewhere in Missouri or Oklahoma. It wasn't impossible, even though it was a long way from Snake River Valley in Idaho. I figured something drastic must have happened in his life, as it was very unusual for a hound to be traveling all alone. Perhaps he had been stolen, or maybe he had been sold for some much-needed money. Whatever it was that had interrupted his life, he was trying to straighten it out. He was trying to go home to the master he loved, and with the help of God, he would make it. To him, it made no difference how long the road or how rough or rocky. His old red feet would keep jogging along, on and on, mile after mile. There would be no crying or giving up. When his feet grew tired and weary, he would curl up in the weeds and rest. Water from the rain puddle or mountain stream would quench his thirst and cool his hot, dry throat. Food found along the highway, or the offerings from a friendly hand would ease the pangs of hunger. Through the rains and snows or the desert heat, he would jog along, never looking back. Some morning he would be found curled up on the front porch. The long journey would be over. He would be home. There would be a lot of tail wagging and a few whimpering cries. His warm, moist tongue would caress the hand of his master. All would be forgiven. Once again, the lights would shine in this dog's world. His heart would be happy. After my friend had disappeared in the darkness, I stood and stared at the empty alley. A strange feeling came over me. At first, I thought I was lonely or sad, but I realized that wasn't it all. The feeling was a wonderful one. Although the old hound had no way of knowing it, he had stirred memories, and what priceless treasures they were. Memories of my boyhood days. An old KC baking powder can and 2 little red hounds. Memories of a wonderful love, unselfish devotion, and death in its saddest form. As I turned to enter my yard, I started to lock the gate, and then I thought, no, I'll leave it open. He might come back. I was about halfway to the house when a cool breeze drifted down the rugged Tetons. It had a bite in it, and goose pimples jumped out on my skin. I stopped at the woodshed and picked up several sticks of wood. I didn't turn on any lights on entering the house. The dark, quiet atmosphere was a perfect setting for the mood I was in. I built a fire in the fireplace and pulled up my favorite rocker. As I sat there in silence, the fire grew larger. It crackled and popped. Firelight shadows began to shimmer and dance around the room. The warm, comfortable heat felt good. I struck a match to light my pipe. As I did, 2 beautiful cups gleamed from the mantel. I held the match up so I could get a better look. There they were, sitting side by side. One was large, with long, upright handles that stood out like wings on a mourning dove. The lightly polished surface gleamed and glistened with a golden sheen. The other one was smaller and made of silver. It was neat and trim and sparkled like a white star in the heavens. I got up and took them down. There was a story in those cups, a story that went back more than half a century. As I caressed the smooth surfaces, my mind drifted back through the years, back to my boyhood days. How wonderful the memories were. Piece by piece, the story unfolded. So, I don't know if you remember what it's called when an author tells about something that happened in the past. I'm going to give you a second in case you're thinking of it, and then I'm going to reveal what it is. But he's doing what is called a flashback. So now he is going into what happened in the past. That was the present. And now he's going to tell why he's talking about those cups, and he's talking about a day when a dog had saved his life. Okay, so chapter 2 starts in when he was a little boy. Okay, I suppose there's a time in practically every young boy's life when he's affected by that wonderful disease of puppy love. I don't mean the kind of boy has for a pretty little girl that lives down the road. I mean the real kind. The kind that has 4 small feet and a wiggly tail and sharp little teeth that can gnaw on a boy's finger. The kind a boy can romp and play with, even eat and sleep with. I was 10 years old when I first became infected with this terrible disease. Now, is it really a disease? No. He's comparing it to a disease. I'm sure no boy in the world had it worse than I did. It's not easy for a young boy to want a dog and not be able to have one. It starts gnawing on his heart and gets all mixed up in his dreams. It gets worse and worse until finally it becomes unbearable. If my dog wanting hadn't been that of an ordinary boy, I'm sure my mother and father would have gotten me a puppy. But my wants were different. I didn't want just one dog. I wanted 2, and not just any kind of dog. They had to be special kind and a special breed. I had to have some dogs. I went to my father and had a talk with him. He scratched his head and he thought it over. Well, Billy, he said, I heard that old man Hatfield's collie is going to have pups. I'm sure we can get one of them for you. He may as well have poured cold water on me. Papa, I said, I don't want a old collie dog. I want hounds, coon hounds, and I want 2 of them. I could tell by the look on his face that he wanted to help me, but he couldn't. He said, Billy, those kind of dogs cost money, and that's something we just don't have right now. Maybe someday, when we can afford it, you can have them, but not right now. I didn't give up. After my talk with Papa, I went to Mama. Now, how many of you do that? You go to your mom, or you go to your dad, then you go to the other one. So he's trying that trick. I fared no better there. Right off, she said, I was too young to be hunting with hounds. Besides, a hunter needed a gun, and that was one thing I couldn't have, not until I was 21. So they've also told him he can't have a gun until he's 21. I couldn't understand it. There I was sitting right in the middle of the finest hunting country in the world, and I didn't even have a dog. Our home was in a beautiful valley far back in the rugged Ozarks. The country was new and sparsely settled. Okay, if you're having to do setting, they just gave you a good setting there. A valley in the rugged Ozarks. The land we lived on was Cherokee land, allotted to my mother because of the Cherokee blood that flowed through her veins. It lay in a strip from the foothills of the mountains to the banks of the Illinois River in northeastern Oklahoma. The land was rich, black, and fertile. Papa said it would grow hair on a crosscut saw. He was the first man to stick the cold steel point of a turning plow into the virgin soil. Mama had picked the spot for our log house. It settled at the edge of the foothills in the mouth of the small canyon and was surrounded by a grove of huge red oaks. Behind our house, one could see miles and miles of the mighty Ozarks. In the spring, the aromatic scent of wildflowers, redbuds, pawpaws, and dogwoods drifting on the wind currents spread over the valley and around our house. Below our fields, twisting and winding, ran the clear blue waters of the Illinois River. The banks were cool and shady. The rich bottom land near the river was studded with the tall sycamores, birches, and box elders. To a 10-year-old country boy, it was the most beautiful place in the whole wide world. And I took advantage of it all. I roamed the hills and the river bottoms. I knew every game trail in the thick cane brakes and every animal track that was pressed in the mud along the riverbanks. The ones that fascinated me the most were the baby-like tracks of a river coon. I'd lay for hours examining them. Before leaving, I'd take a switch and sweep them all away. These I called my trail looks. The next day, I'd hurry back, and sure enough, 9 times out of 10, there in the clean-swept ground, I would again find the tracks of a ring-tail coon. I knew he had passed over the trail during the night. I could close my eyes and almost see him, humped up and waddling along, fishing under the banks with his delicate little paws for crawfish, frogs, and minnows. I was a hunter from the time I could walk. I caught lizards on the rail fences, rats in the corn crib, and frogs in the little creek that ran through the fields. I was a young Daniel Boone. And I don't know if any of you know who Daniel Boone is. That would be a good little research for you. As the days passed, the dog-wanting disease grew worse. I began to see dogs in my sleep. I went back to my father and my mother. It was the same old story. Good hounds cost money, and they just didn't have it. My dog-wanting became so bad, I began to lose weight, and my food didn't taste good anymore. Mama noticed this, and she had a talk with Papa. "You're going to have to do something," she said. "I never saw a boy grieve like that. It's not right at all." "I know," said Papa, "and I feel just as badly as you do. But what can I do? You know we don't have that kind of money." "I don't care," said Mama. "You've got to do something. I can't stand to see him cry like that. Besides, he's getting to be a problem. I can't get my work done. He follows me around all day begging for hounds." "I offered to get him a dog," said Papa, "but he doesn't want any kind of dog. He wants hounds, and they cost money. Do you know what the Parker boys paid for those 2 hounds they bought? $75. If I had that much money, I'd buy another mule. I sure do need one." Now, some of you are thinking, $75? That's not much. How come you can't buy it? Well, this story did not take place in today's times, so $75 was more, plus they don't have a lot of money. I had overheard this conversation from another room. At first, it made me feel pretty good. At least I was getting to be a problem. Then I didn't feel so good. I knew my mother and father were poor and didn't have any money. I began to feel sorry for them and myself. After thinking it over, I figured out a way to help. Even though it was a great sacrifice, I told Papa I had decided I didn't want 2 hounds. 1 would be enough. I saw the hurt in his eyes. It made me feel like someone was squeezing water out of my heart. Papa set me on his lap, and we had a good talk. He told me how hard times were and that it looked like a man couldn't get a fair price for anything he raised. Some of the farmers had quit farming and were cutting railroad ties so they could feed their families. If things didn't get better, that's what he'd have to do. He said he'd give anything if he could get some good hounds for me, but there didn't seem to be any way he could right then. I went off to bed with my heart all torn in little pieces and cried myself to sleep. The next day, Papa had to go to the store. Late that evening, I saw him coming back. As fast as I could, I ran to meet him, expecting a sack of candy. Instead, he handed me 3 small steel traps. If Santa Claus himself had come down out of the mountains, reindeer and all, I could not have been more pleased. I jumped up and down and cried a whole bucket full of tears. I hugged him and told him what a wonderful Papa he was. He showed me how to set them by mashing the spring down with my foot and how to work the trigger. I took them to bed with me that night. So he's very excited that he got the traps. And why is that? What is he going to do with the traps? Of course he's going to hunt. And let's see if this satisfies his dog wanting. The next morning, I started trapping around the barn. The first thing I caught was Sammy, our house cat. It didn't cause If this didn't cause a commotion, I didn't intend to catch him. I was trying to catch a rat. But somehow he came nosing around and got in my trap. My sister started bawling and yelling for Mama. She came running, wanting to know what in the world was going on. None of us had to tell her. Sammy told her he was spitting and squalling. He was mad. He couldn't understand what that thing was and what was biting his foot, and he was making an awful fuss about it. His tail was as big as a wet corn cob, and every hair in his small body was sticking straight up. He spit and yowled and dared anyone to get close to him. My sisters yelled with their fools' heads off, all the time saying, "Poor Sammy, poor Sammy." Mom shushed them up and told me to go get the forked stick from under the clothesline. I ran and got it. Mama was the best helper a boy ever had. She put the forked end over Sammy's neck and pinned him to the ground. It was bad enough for the trap to be biting his foot, but to have his neck pinned that way was too much. He threw a fit. You never heard such a racket in all my life. It wasn't long until everything in this place was all spooked up. The chickens started cackling and flew up the hillside. Daisy, our milk cow, all but tore the barn lot and refused to give any milk that night. Sloppy Ann, our hog, started running in circles and squealing and grunting. Sammy wiggled and twisted. He yowled and spit, but it didn't do him any good. Mama was good and stout. She held him down tight to the ground. I ran in and put my foot on the trap spring, mashed it down and released his foot. With one loud squall, he scooted under the barn. After it was over, Mama said, "I don't think you'll have any more trouble with that cat. I think he has learned his lesson." How wrong Mama was. Sammy was one of those nosy kind of cats. He would lie up on the red oak limbs and watch every move I made. I found some slick little trails out in the garden down under some tall hollyhocks, thinking they were game trails, and not knowing that they were Sammy's favorite hunting trails. I set my traps. Sammy couldn't understand what I was doing out there, messing with his hunting territory. He went to investigate. It wasn't long until I had him limping with all 4 feet. Every time Papa saw Sammy lying in the warm sun with his feet wrapped in his turpentine rags, he would laugh until tears rolled down his cheeks. Mama had another talk with Papa. She said he was going to have to say something to me because if I caught that cat one more time, it was going to drive her out of her mind. Papa told me to be a little bit more careful when I set my traps. "Papa," I said, "I don't want to catch Sammy, but he's the craziest cat I ever saw. He sees everything I do and just has to go sniffing around." Papa looked over at Sammy. He was lying all sprawled out on the sunshine with all 4 paws bandaged and sticking straight up. His long tail was swishing this way and that. "You see, Papa," I said, "he's watching me right now, just waiting for me to set my traps." Papa walked off toward the barn. I heard him laughing, a fit to kill. It finally got too tough for Sammy. He left home. Oh, he came in once in a while, all long and lean looking, but he never was the same friendly cat anymore. He was nervous and wouldn't let anybody pet him. He would gobble down his milk and then scoot out for the timber. Well, if somebody kept catching me like that, I wouldn't want to come around either. Once I decided to make friends with him because I felt bad about catching him in my traps. I reached out my hand to rub his back. He swelled up like a sitting hen. His eyeballs got all green and he growled way down deep. He spat at me and drew his paw back like he was going to knock my head off. I decided I'd better leave him alone. In no time at all, I cleaned out the rats. Then something bad happened. I caught one of Mama's prize hens. I got one of those young man peach tree switchings over that. Now, do you know what a switching is? They'll talk about it more than once, but they used to have people go out and get a stick, and then you would get spanked with it. So, Papa told me to go down to the canebrakes back to our fields and trap. This opened up all kinds of new wonders. I caught possums, skunks, rabbits, and squirrels. Papa showed me how to skin my game. In neat little rows, I tacked the hides on the smokehouse wall. I'd stand for hours and admire my magnificent trophies. Now, do you know what hides are? It's where they would basically skin the animals, and then they would keep them, and they would use them for things, or they could sell them. There was only one thing wrong. I didn't have a big coonskin to add to my collection. I couldn't trap old Mr. Ringtail. He was too smart for me. He'd steal the bait from the traps, spring the triggers, and sometimes even turn them over. Once I found a small stick standing upside in one of my traps. I showed it to Papa. He laughed and said the stick must have fallen from the tree. It made no difference what Papa said. I was firmly convinced that a smart old coon was deliberately poked that stick in my trap. The trap helped my dog wanting considerably, but like a new toy, the newness wore off, and I was right back where I started from. Only this time it was worse, much worse. I had been exposed to the feel of wildlife. I started pestering Mama again. She said, "Oh no, not that again. I thought you'd be satisfied with the traps." "No, Billy, I don't want to hear any more about hounds." I knew Mama meant what she said. This broke my heart. I decided I'd leave alone home. I sneaked out a quart jar of peaches, some cold cornbread, and a few onions, and started up the hollow back of our house. I had it all figured out. I'd go away off to some big town, get 100 dogs, and bring them all back with me. I made it all right until I heard a timber wolf howl. This stopped my home leaving, so he was going to run away. So he packs all that stuff, but then he hears a wolf, and he comes back. When the hunting season opened that fall, something happened that was almost more than I could stand. I was lying in my bed one night trying to figure out a way that I could get some dogs when I heard the deep baying of a coonhound. I got up and opened my window. It came again. The deep voice rang loud and clear in the frosty night. Now and then I could hear the hunter whooping to him. The hound hunted all night. He quit the roosters, started crowing at daybreak. The hunter and the hound weren't the only ones awake that night. I stayed up and listened to them until the last tones of the hound's voice died away in the daylight hours. That morning I was determined to have some hounds. I went again to Mama. This time I tried bribery. I told her if she'd get me a hunting dog, I'd save the money I earned from my furs and buy her a new dress and a box full of pretty hats. This time I saw tears in her eyes. It made me feel all empty inside, and I cried a little too. By the time she was through kissing me and talking to me, I was sure I didn't need those dogs at all. I couldn't stand to see Mama cry. The next night I heard the hound again. I tried to cover my head in a pillow to shut out the sound. It was no use. This voice seemed to bore its way through the pillow and ring in my ears. I had to get up and again go to the window. I'm sure if that coon hunter had known that he was slowly killing a 10-year-old boy, he would have put a muzzle on his hound. Now, he wasn't killing the boy, but it was making him feel like he was, dying because he's listening to this coon hound, and that's what he wants. Sleep was out of the question. Even on nights when I couldn't hear the hound, I couldn't sleep. I was afraid if I did, he would come and I would miss hearing him. By the time hunting season was over, I was a nervous wreck. My eyes were red and bloodshot. I had lost weight and was as thin as a beanpole. Mama checked me over. She looked at my tongue and turned back one of my eyelids. "If I didn't know any better," she said, "I'd swear you weren't sleeping well. Are you?" "Why, Mama," I said, "I go to bed, don't I? What does a boy go to bed for if it isn't to sleep?" By the little wrinkles that bunched up on her forehead, I could tell that Mama wasn't satisfied. Papa came in during one of the inspections. Mama told him she was worried about my health. "Ah," he said, "there's nothing wrong with him. He's just because he's all cooped up in the winter. A boy needs sunshine and exercise. He's almost 11 now, and I'm going to let him help me in the fields this summer. That will put a little muscles back on him." I thought this was wonderful. I'd finally grown up to be a man. I was going to help Papa with the farm. So he is 10 when this book starts, and they are trying to distract him because they can't buy him the hounds, and so it doesn't seem like Billy is giving up. So that's kind of an important part of this and a part of his character when you think about his character traits, okay? We will do 3 and 4 on the next video and just kind of keep trucking away. If you want to read ahead of me, that'd be great, because then when I stop and talk about something, you'll kind of know. And I look forward to seeing you on Zoom.